Okay, so let's get started. So thank you for joining today's Upside webinar. My name is Ella. I'm a consultant based in the London office. And before we get started, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to push out a quick poll to get everyone going and interested in this Upside webinar. So hopefully you can see that on your screen now. It's just to get a good idea of where you are in your brand journey. So are you considering a brand refresh? Or are you currently going through one? Have you recently rebranded? Or none of the above? You're just interested to hear what we have to say. Get a second. We've got half people answered already. Okay, so let's end that one there. Interestingly, we have people that have recently rebranded, are considering a rebrand, and are currently going through. And so we have a full mix on the call today. So hopefully this will be very useful for you. So for those that don't know, Upside is an add-in to the Microsoft Suite that is designed to help you with low value added tasks. The idea is that we would help you with productivity, collaboration, and one of the main things that we like to focus on is consistency. So we have helped many brands achieve global brand consistency by using Upside. An example of where ensuring brand consistency is super important is when launching a new or revamped brand. So the Upside global consultant team have worked with many clients when updating their brands, especially in the last year. Personally, I have worked with clients like Apax and ThinkApp, and I also was the consultant that helped DC with their brand consolidation project, which we're going to be discussing today. So with that, Jen will come to who you are in a second, but first, can you just tell us a little bit about DC?
Sure, thank you for that, Ella. Hi, everyone. For those of you who don't know, DC Advisory is an international mid-market investment bank. So we offer corporate finance advisory services, M&A advisory, debt advisory and restructuring across 22 different locations and 11 different industry verticals. So in essence, our marketing function supports approximately 600 bankers.
Going on to who you are and your role at DC.
Yes, so I'm Jen. I am the Managing Director of our International Marketing and Communications function. And I have had quite a global brand journey really throughout my career. So I've been working in financial services marketing for nearly 15 years. I started my career at Barclays Capital when it was Barclays Capital, and have since worked for lots of other global organizations such as Thomson Reuters, Alvarez & Marsal, Taxand, until just nearly 5 years ago, I started at DC Advisory for their global brand journey.
It's lovely to have you on the call today, Jen. Last but not least, we have Holly on the line as well. Please you introduce yourself, Holly.
Yes, hello everyone. I am Holly. I am an International Marketing and Communications Manager at DC Advisory. I joined the business 4 years ago, having worked in the charity sector prior to that. So I really came in when the business was just beginning its growth trajectory and have been part of the brand journey that has accommodated that growth ever since.
Thank you both very much for being here today. So you've met me, you've met the speakers, but what are we all doing here today? The idea of today is that you're going to walk away with some tangible tips on how to prepare for your brand project, talk about the transitioning to the new identity, and also tips for launching. So before we do that, some housekeeping rules. Please keep yourself muted and ask your questions using the chat functionality. We'd love to hear your comments and maybe even some of your own tips throughout. We'll come to those at the end. You'll also see some polls, as we just had a go at there as well, appearing on your screen. So please do interact with those. The idea is that this is an interactive session and answer those accordingly. And finally, the session is being recorded, so you don't need to scribble down any of DC's tips that you heard today. You'll be able to rewatch at your leisure at a later date. So with that, I'm just going to stop sharing my screen so you can see everyone's faces, and we'll kick straight into it. So Jen, can you tell us about what the catalyst was for your brand journey and kind of walk us through the brand journey over the past few years?
Sure. So as I mentioned, DC Advisory operates across 22 different locations, but that wasn't always the case. DC Advisory in the last 10 years has had a vision that's developed really to become the leading mid-market international investment bank. And with the help of our incredibly visionary shareholder, Daiwa Securities, over the course of the past decade, we've made several acquisitions and opened up some offices organically. So really to get to that kind of global footprint that we sit at now. In terms of brand, that kind of posed a number of different challenges really, because we had lots of legacy brands, so businesses that had been bought out and needed rebranding, and then also some sort of brand identity that was in its infancy in lots of different territories. So from a sort of brand strategy standpoint, our challenge was to bring all of that together and capture all of the magic in the different territories. So what was it that was special about each of those legacy brands and our existing DC Advisory identity, just to create one sort of super global brand identity. Another challenge, obviously, as I'm sure all marketers on the call will know, is senior stakeholders. We had lots of different senior stakeholders with different ideas about what that brand should be. So a real challenge from our standpoint. But ultimately, I think we understood that without consolidating the brand, without having that one sort of premier identity that was market facing, we really did risk not capitalizing on the growth strategy that our shareholder and the business had undertaken over the course of the past decade. So that was our kind of brand journey up until that point.
Yeah, it's really interesting to hear, and you've kind of touched on it there, but one of the biggest challenges we see our clients face when going through a project like this is getting that senior stakeholder or CEO buy-in early on in the project. So how did you go about doing this, and what advice would you give for anyone that's about embarking on this section of the project?
Yeah, I mean, it is the big challenge. What's the value of the brand? How do you get people to understand that? I think with any kind of rebrand project, you obviously need to speak your stakeholders' language. And for us, the sort of senior stakeholders involved here were the chief executives of each of the different offices that we were looking after. And we were lucky in the sense that we had a really clear business growth strategy, and that was to become the premier mid-market investment bank globally. So taking that business objective, we then started to think about the risks and rewards that a brand strategy could either mitigate or present. And from a risk standpoint, that was, you know, we've made all of this sort of successful growth activity take place, but really the marketplace doesn't know about it. So we're really getting the return on investment on multiple acquisitions or opening new offices. And the brand and its brand consolidated identity was a way to ensure that that risk was mitigated. I think also from a reward standpoint, it's the general value of marketing really. When we consolidated everybody under one brand identity, we were pumping that brand equity full in every single location. So your brand equity is sort of supercharged by everybody marching in step. So the risks and rewards were really clear, and I think aligning with the business's growth strategy was essential really for CEOs. What I would say, however, is that with each of those different chief executives, they each had a sort of local journey with the brand. So we needed to make sure that the messaging, when we were selling in the concept of creating this one identity, we needed to make sure that it spoke to what their concerns were. So an example of that is our US acquisitions were incredibly important to our European chief executives. We needed to make sure, or we understood that to sort of propel their brand in their local markets, that US footprint was really, really important. So we sold on that, and we said this is all part of making sure that you're benefiting from the US footprint. But for our US audience, they hadn't really had a sort of tech-focused marketing function. So, and they are a tech and software expert. That's their unique selling point. So it's really important for us to sell in. Let's represent through the brand what you represent through your product offering. So I'd say understanding the local nuances of those stakeholders is a top tip as well. I think also when we looked to undertake this project, it was at a time where the pandemic and the sort of fallout from the pandemic was becoming clearer. And what I mean by that is people our sort of bankers around the world were not able to go and meet their clients face to face. So it was even more critical that the shop window that we were presenting to market was unanimous, and it was successful, and it felt premium. So I think collectively we understood that a digital shop window with a new and consolidated brand identity was really pretty essential to driving that business growth strategy and to further client acquisition. So I think they'd probably be my 3 top tips in CEO buy-in.
Yeah, it's great to hear. And out of all of those tips, what would you mark as the most important?
Business growth strategy. Essential to align your brand strategy with your business growth strategy. They have to march in step.
Thank you. Good to know. So by this point in the project, you've flagged the need to change, you've got your CEO buy-in. What do you think are the key elements you need to start with when planning a project of this type?
So I think all good marketers know that project management 101 and the principles in those are essential. And I'd say for this particular project, 2 of those core principles were the most important. So a project team of all of your key stakeholders. And I would beware of the pitfalls of just making sure you've got decision makers in that project team. Our project team comprised decision makers, which were the chief executives who were ultimately going to sign off on anything that we took forward. But we also have decision facilitators as well. So they're the kind of expert advisors, whether it's an agency or whether it's a sort of communications strategist. Make sure that you've got those people in the room to really tease out those critical questions from decision makers. We also have decision contributors. And this is a funny thing. Obviously, you've got your chief execs who are going to sign off on whatever you're going to progress from a brand identity standpoint. But actually, there were people around our business who are on the ground and interacting with clients day in, day out. So their contributions were also materially valuable to the overall decision-making process. And then perhaps most crucially, potential decision preventers. Again, I will speak to what I'm sure is a massive marketing audience. Ultimately, legal and compliance are a key part of anything that is going to go externally. And for us, we face the challenges of being a regulated business in the UK and in the US. So making sure that the legal and compliance function came along with us from the beginning of the journey meant that we didn't get to that crucial point where everything's ready and then all of a sudden it's not signed off. So we brought those along with us. So as well as your lovely project team all together, all marching in step, a comprehensive project plan, which I'm sure everybody on the call is familiar with. It is essential to set a launch date and for the marketing team to go above and beyond in facilitating the meeting of that deadline. And I would say there's a kind of quick tip that I would add to that in progressing a project, which is something which I'm sure we've all used, the assumptive close. So where your project is progressing through different stages, instead of asking people to approve, assuming that they do and asking them to disagree is a really powerful mechanism to keep a project marching with momentum. And it's something that helped us quite considerably. So say project management principles, very, very important. Assumptive close, very, very important. But also any kind of rebrand project, you're talking about multiple assets for anything that the brand touches, and logos are on everything, which I'm sure all marketers have to face on a daily basis. So one of the things that we did during this project, which was crucial, was taking an assets inventory and really prioritizing the things that we felt were going to have the biggest impact. When you're planning any project like this, you obviously don't want it to drag on for years and years, because the project needs to feel like it's got momentum. So making sure that you're prioritizing shop window assets, such as a website or superficial overlay on pitch books, email signatures, they're a really, really good place to start. We did implement quite a nice tactic, which was an incredibly visible shop window tactic. So when we rebranded, we made sure that every single banker around the world received a laptop case that had the new brand on it and our new tagline. And that meant straight away from the launch date, it was a talking point and it was visible. So yeah, I'd say assets inventory and prioritization, as well as the project management piece.
Thank you for that. I know that's not necessarily an asset, but kind of in a similar vein, one of the things that you wanted to change was DC's missions and values. So before we discuss this, I'm just going to do another quick poll. So let me just pull that one up. Oops, stop sharing that one. So missions and values. So hopefully that'll be on your screens now. So do you feel that your current brand missions and values accurately reflect who you are as a business? So hopefully DC's will be yes after their reinvention project, but interesting to see what everyone else has to say about theirs. So I'll just give it another few seconds. You can see half people have participated already. Okay, so most people feel that they do. A couple say less and some are unsure. So interesting, but by all means, still very important. So I obviously worked with you on a little part of this project, but I know that this is like a key thing for you. So what is the kind of key element when kind of aligning your DC's new brand and missions to basically the reinvented brand to the new missions and values?
Yes, I think it's a great question. Any kind of brand revamp or rebrand, or however we want to talk about it, needs to have substance behind it. So the mission and values is a critical part of this. The way that we actually approached this for this project was first to run a brand perception study. And this was the tool that we used for the very critical step in listening to your audiences. And when running a brand perception study, we didn't just think about who is in our loyal client-based ecosystem, who do we talk to all the time, because of course they're important. But we also considered the aspirational clients, and this comes back to that growth strategy for the business. If we have aspirations to be bigger, expand our audiences, be in new territories, operate in new sectors, we need to think about that when we're developing a brand. So we reached out to around 50 key and aspirational clients in each of our core territories. So that was Europe, Asia, and the US. And we really wanted to get to understand how is the brand effective? So how are we standing out amidst our competitors? What are we doing differently? But also, what could we do more of? And what could we do better? And there were lots and lots and lots of outputs from that particular study, lots of which was materially valuable actually to our client relationships teams. But from a brand standpoint, there were a couple of key outputs which really stood out. One of which was about being more human and more accessible, and the other was about being more global and presenting our purpose, which is where the missions and values piece came in. So obviously we understood from the audiences that we were trying to reach that our purpose wasn't clear and it wasn't visible. So we needed to do some work on that. And I would say we were lucky in this sense. We knew that DCs around the world were doing lots and lots and lots of good things. So we were recycling, we had charitable donations going out, we had inclusion and diversity initiatives, but they weren't really formalized at all. And it's very difficult to communicate those values in a sort of comprehensive way. And in that sense, the best tip I can offer here is use a best practice framework. For us, we have a shareholder who had pledged to support the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which for anyone who isn't familiar with them, that's 18 goals to ensure a more sustainable and more equitable future for all. Now, we couldn't pledge to support all 18, and actually we really studied the feedback from the brand perception study to think about which of those goals was most pertinent to us. And we landed on 3: good health and well-being, reduced inequalities, and climate action. And what that helped us to do was not only speak back to the feedback from our audiences, so here was a formalized and comprehensive strategy around what our purpose really was, but it also gave us a lot of resources and tools, because best practice frameworks come with a lot of recommendations. So it was a really important step for us. And I think that work really helped us then on the journey through to the tagline, which hopefully you can see on the screen, not a secret plug at all there for our tagline. So DC Advisory's new tagline as part of this brand journey is making a difference. And to reach that point of making a difference, we use the magic brand trifecta. So who are we? What do we do? And what do we stand for? And the what do we stand for thing was sort of driven by that UN SDG work and that pledge, which was incredibly helpful. But the making a difference was also what we do for clients every day. And it's what we wanted to do. It was our sort of visionary approach to business. So that was how we landed on our statement. So it was quite a journey to get to those missions and values, but ultimately the tagline that popped out manages to capture all of them, as well as the best practice framework for us to communicate a little bit more detail around what we stood for.
Yeah. So we can obviously see a little bit of your visual identity today, and obviously how that the new missions and values are a part of that. But on a broader scale, how do you successfully translate those new missions and values into DC's visual identity?
Great question, really good question. We know that talking about a brand is one thing, but it's really about how a brand makes you feel. And to achieve that, to achieve something different successfully, it is about altering the core brand assets that you own. So without wanting to sound like some sort of creative guru, I can talk a little bit about the assets that we did look at, and that's our logo. So you'll notice, we've got the DC Advisory logo. It's pretty standardized. It's actually been the same logo for the past 10 years. During this process, we knew actually tampering with that could potentially damage some of the brand equity that we built up in some of the territories where we'd operated for longer. So we made a decision to keep the logo as it was and to really maintain that brand integrity. But what we did play around with was the colors. And as you can see, we've got some purples and pinks, hopefully slightly different to what you would expect from a corporate finance advisor. But we leaned on our tertiary palette, and started to play around with colours that weren't visible across our competitors' websites. There's lots and lots of science behind blue being a trusted colour and black and white being more formal. And actually, we ran an exercise with our chief executives to peel off the logos of each of our competitors and just put those website homepages in front of them, really to demonstrate this is how much we're blending into the crowd. So colour played a really important role in that differentiation angle, and something that we think had a pretty big impact. The third piece is probably imagery. So I mentioned from the brand perception study, one of the things that came back was that we didn't appear particularly human, and that we weren't accessible for that reason, and which is unfortunate given that we are a people business. It's based on the advisory capabilities of our people. So we did away with any stock people imagery, and we replaced it with reportage shots and photography of real DC advisory advisors working day to day in each of our territories. And that really brought the site to life. And it meant that ultimately it felt slightly more human. I think it also sort of, as a lovely byproduct, meant that our DC advisory people and community felt more connected to the brand and to our shop window. So I'd say the logos and the colours and the creative took a massive step forward. Like anything, it's important to test a new visual identity. I think people respond very differently to colours and shapes and imagery. So it's important that we went out to a pretty diverse group of people, and that's within our DC advisory community, just to make sure that it resonated with them and that they felt it would resonate with the sectors in which they operate. So I think 50 to 60 people worldwide were sort of tested, asked lots of questions. With that feedback, we sort of embodied that as we progressed the development of the assets. And again, it had a brilliant output because people felt like they were along on the journey. They felt like they were partners to the brand development story, and ultimately became brand ambassadors after that. So yeah, I'd say those two things.
Yeah, I think internal buy-in is huge. And obviously this is kind of what you did, was almost like a soft internal launch. Was there anything else that you did internally before going externally? And then also, what were your tips for launching externally as well?
Yes, great question. So we did both internal and external launch. And I think a top tip is to keep a sizable period of time between the two of them. And I say that for a couple of reasons. Internal buy-in is crucial because to my point earlier about creating brand ambassadors, I think that's really, really important. But actually it's more important because when you do launch something externally, I think all of us have experienced this as marketers, no one cares. no one actually cares that you've changed your logo, and no one really cares if the colours change on your website, which I appreciate is slightly controversial. However, what they do care about is why. Why have you done this, and why is it beneficial to me? And I think through the internal launch, we were able to sense check some of that messaging and make sure that when we did come to the external launch, that we had some really solid key messages for the audiences that we were going out to explain why this global consolidation had taken place. It's also, I think, again, every marketer has experienced this, when you're about to launch something and a million different people come in and say, why does it look like that? And what are you going to do about this? And perhaps we could change this. And actually, I think there might be a typo. Giving yourself enough time between internal and external launch captures all of that stuff, and it makes everybody feel confident by the time you get to the external piece. And I think for us, we obviously, the UAT phase had happened, I think, just a month beforehand, and then 2 weeks later we did the internal launch. So pretty long period of time actually for our internal stakeholders. Then when it comes to the external launch, I think, as I mentioned, no one really cares unless there's a key message and a benefit to them. So making sure that whatever you are doing to your brand, that there is a message, a concrete message that sits behind it. For us, we went out to say, this is us, we're global, and we're all under one roof. And now you can find everything that you need to on this perfectly dynamic website that's easy to use and has all the information there that you might need. But it was also about our mission statement. So as I mentioned from the brand perception study, in the absence of that kind of purpose piece that DC Advisory had before, it was an opportunity for us to say, and also we've kind of reevaluated. We've got this clear vision now about how we want to make a difference to people and to the planet and to progress more generally on a societal level. So a really, really clear set of key messages that with the internal launch, we were able to communicate through workshops and emails, but with the external launch, we were able to hit very clearly on the website, on social media, and via client communications as well.
And for your project in particular, did you find the internal or the external adoption of the reinvented brand more tricky?
Internal, always, I think. Again, that's to do with the feedback, because I would love to think that our clients are sat looking at our website and that they'll suddenly notice as soon as a page has changed, and it's just not the case. Our internal stakeholders were really the ones to win over first, and once they felt proud and once they understood what this meant in terms of the next phase of the business's growth, it became a kind of evolving set of brand ambassadors, which I keep saying, sorry, but evolving set of brand ambassadors that then perpetuated the message into the marketplaces that they were working.
Yeah, I'm sure that answer resonates with people on the call that have gone through a rebrand as well. So before we move into the next section, I have another poll for you. So this one is on tools. So are people on the call using tools internally to help ensure brand adoption? So do you have outsourced tools, internal tools, or no tools at present? Again, I'll just give you a minute to answer that, and then I'll share the results. So still getting a few answers. We've got around half the people answered already. So I'll end the poll here and share the results with you. So we can see that there's a mix between internal and outsourced tools, and also the majority of people on the call that answered have no tools at present. So speaking of tools, Holly, obviously you and I worked very closely on this project together. But it'd be great for you to explain to everyone on the call today where Upside came into the project and how we initially helped.
Yeah, so as we've already walked through, the DC Advisory brand expanded very rapidly. And with that, there were brand discrepancies that appeared as we entered new geographies and adopted new offices. This was very much present in the pitch process. So the way in which we were introducing new business to DC Advisory was differing slightly. So on launching the new look and feel of the brand, we wanted to create a one-stop shop for all new materials, and to also give everyone the opportunity to share how they were using the new brand templates across borders. So Upslide was really the answer to this, and gave us all the tools to do this whilst also increasing pitch efficiency. So which really helped as well with the buy-in of Upslide as a selling point. And so we built an Upslide library in particular, was one of the key selling points, with creative assets, off-the-shelf pitch books, a cookbook, which is basically a best practice guide on how to use the new template, and gave real-time examples of how different offices were using our new look and feel pitch books.
It's always great to hear a project that I worked on reaping rewards. But what was the impact of Upslide in particular, do you think?
Yeah, so Upslide was really helpful in launching and then also maintaining those brand guidelines for pitching in all of our territories. So we rolled Upslide out to almost exclusively to those who we deemed on the front line, so the pitch creating juniors. And then that gave us that gave them the instant access to not only the latest materials, which I listed just now, but also latest deal data, tombstones, headshots, bios. So basically everything they might need to begin a pitch. And it also meant that where they may be working on cross-border mandates, they weren't limited by time zones, communicating with each other. Can I have your MD's headshot or bio, etc. It was all available and instantly droppable into whatever slide they were then working on.
Yeah, it's great. Obviously, one of our first clients on our Dynamic Libraries module, so definitely reaping the rewards of tombstones and bios and CVs being super accessible. What was the key ROI for Upslide at DC, do you think, Holly?
Yeah, so obviously, as we're working with you, Ella, and the rest of the Upslide team, that ability to track the usage and have those quarterly stats on who was clicking where, how much each country was using, and whether there was people who maybe need a little nudge to really see the benefits of Upslide was really helpful. And from the very beginning, we set up a working group, which was international in nature and was made up of predominantly junior team members who would be using and benefiting from Upslide. So it was a lot of analysts and associates from each office that then acted as evangelists and actual boots on the ground in those offices to promote Upslide, and then ultimately not only promote the pitch efficiency tools that were available, but then also the global brand itself, and ensuring that everybody was on the same page with how we wanted those materials used.
That's great. I feel like we've discussed it obviously in our meetings about the actual time saved. So obviously you're getting this brand consolidation and then the actual time saved in pitch book creation as well. So great to hear of the project was such a success. So before we wrap up on the brand story at DC, I want to know how you measured other parts of the success of this project. What are the factors or metrics do you think that people should consider?
Yeah, I think I've said this 3 times now. This is the $1 million question. What's the return on investment for marketing? What is the value of a brand, or indeed a rebrand by extension? I think so. We had our 2 clear goals, which was to deliver a global brand that felt premium, and that was because we wanted to be the premier mid-market investment bank globally. So I think we did solicit a fair bit of feedback once the launch had happened, and obviously we consistently work with the sort of back-end statistics to identify whether or not we are reachable and contactable in lots of different territories. So the answer to the question, did we create one global brand? Yes, we did. I think to Holly's point, maintaining that is now the sort of role of the function, but in the first instance, yes, there was a clear one brand, and it was consistently recognizable. The other thing was that kind of internal brand consolidation. So with that sort of significant business growth, there's also people and teams that are working that have suddenly switched identities externally to market. So a kind of crucial part of this was making sure that everybody felt connected to the DC advisory that was now the kind of one master brand. And I think that is a continuous journey. There's always more things that we can do. And after having done the sort of external piece, we looked very closely at the internal piece, things like intranet and internal communications, to make sure that that brand flowed through everything altogether. So I think the global brand, yes, the premium, yes, the internal brand pride, yes. Then we come to that piece, which is the big enigma around marketing data. And I think as any financial services or professional services marketer will know, we are constantly asked, what are the statistics? What was the impact? And it's very difficult to benchmark. I would say that, yes, we increased website traffic by 250% in the first couple of months of our rebrand, and that was our new website piece as well. We got 15,000 new LinkedIn followers. Our impressions were up by 25% on any social post. And that's all kind of very, very impressive. But I think as any marketer knows, you can cut that data anywhere. And it's what does that translate into? What does that actually mean? And for us, part of the rebrand was creating a conversation with our client base. And that's not just with the people that we're talking to all the time, but making sure that across our digital shop windows, we've got a contact us box or an inquiries box, or some way to actually have a dialogue with the wider marketplace. And that was a kind of material improvement from what we'd had before. So that was more sort of dynamic functionality. And I think from the moment that we launched our brand, we were acquiring about 1,000 new inbound requests or inquiries every single month, just from the website platform, which was an impressive metric. But again, these things take time to convert, and I think the science behind the number of different touch points that need to hit a decision maker before they convert and become a source of business is a very very difficult science to master. And I think it's constantly evolving depending on the number of channels that you're using, depending on the touch points, and actually the sort of key decision maker that you're trying to target. So all of that data really fed into it, but I'd say the massive output was that beginning of a conversation about brand. And that was internally with our senior stakeholders. So they saw the role that brand could play, and they saw the value that the brand could bring to any kind of growth strategy. And that was important. But the conversation continues also with our wider marketplace, because we've consulted on what it should look like, because we wanted this to be a brand for everybody. That conversation continues, and I think that kind of relationship is invaluable. So lots and lots of different ways to measure, but the journey continues, I should say.
Well, like I say, it's great to hear such success from one of our clients. I'm just going to share my screen again, and what we have on the screen now is kind of the 5 ultimate tips that we've pulled from the chat that we've had today. It'd be great if you and Holly could just walk through them, say a little bit about them again, just so that people can walk away with 5 clear tips.
Yes, okay, this is beautifully done and beautifully consolidated. So tip number 1, align your brand strategy with the business's growth vision. Make sure that you are a partner to your business and the senior decision makers. Without that, the value of marketing is materially undermined. So if you don't have a clear understanding of what your business's growth or vision is for the future, ask for it. It is something that the leaders of any business should be responsible for developing. And if it's not there, help to shape some of that. There is an opportunity there to make sure that brand plays a key role in the future of the business. So I'd say that's tip 1. Tip 2, listen to your audiences. Again, I've mentioned this is the thing. This was one of the key outputs for us, really starting that conversation about how important brand is, not just with your internal stakeholders, but externally. Listen, whether it's feedback surveys, whether it's taking anecdotal feedback, whether it's working with your stakeholders to know what comes up in a meeting. Everything that you own should be subject to change, and that's how a brand evolves and develops, and it should be doing that real time. So keep listening, I would say. Hols, do you want to do tip 3?
Sure, yeah. So demonstrate your values aesthetically. So the brand visuals carry as much weight as the words. So really taking that time to create exactly what you want to be your brand to antithesize, and ensuring that those are high quality and premium in nature, that they really reflect your values within those assets that you create. Shall I tip 4?
Yeah, go for it, Hol.
Tip 4, bring your internal stakeholders along for the journey. So your brand strategy means nothing without those ambassadors, which I think we've kind of flagged repeatedly throughout this webinar. And that internal review process, especially the one that we went through, was really helpful in fleshing out not only that last little bit of feedback that you know, like we said, we wouldn't want to come post-launch, but also building an understanding of the new feel of the brand for those people that work within the business, so that everybody who works for DC Advisory was armed and ready to discuss exactly what DC Advisory means to external parties. And it was also a great way to get buy-in on all the work that we had kind of put into creating the new look and feel.
I don't mind taking tip 5.
Do you want to take tip 5?
That was a nice little tete-a-tete. Yes, I think the sort of punchline here is generate those results that sit beyond the data. I think we can get lost in the myriad analytics that sit available to us, particularly through digital marketing. But the most important thing is, how do people feel about you? That is what brand delivers, and I think that's the value that can be added. It feels like imperceptible touch, it feels like intangible ROI, but in actual fact, those returns do happen. The magic that happens when people feel something about a brand is still as valuable today as it's ever been. So I think that would be the final tip.
Thank you for that. Hopefully everyone on the call can reap the rewards of your tips that you've put on the screen here. So let's move into some questions. So we've had a few questions in the chat. So I'll start from the top. Chloe asks, what do you think is the perfect length of time for a project like this, and why?
Great question. Great question. It's a careful balance. That feels like a cop-out. It's a careful balance between maintaining momentum. I think I mentioned earlier that these projects can sometimes go on for 12 or 24 months. And it's really important to have a sort of defined launch time. But it's also important to give yourself enough time that you're not rushing through something, and that particularly as it pertains to a global consolidation project, that you're giving yourself enough time to listen and understand the markets that you are going to ultimately be presenting this brand to. And I think for us, that sort of middle ground landed at 9 months. And within that 9 months, we'd sort of run the brand perception study, we'd created the new identity, we'd defined our missions and values, and we'd really brought together what was going to end up being the shop window. And the website project ran very, very neatly alongside that, alongside the communications templates and all the other assets that we talked about. So 9 months is where we landed for our project.
Okay. And then another question from Florian. Did you learn anything along the way? Is there anything that you do differently?
Ooh, so the first one, yes, every day is a school day. I think every marketer can relate to that. You never know everything, and that's what's part of the excitement, I guess, of being part of a marketing function. So yes, we learned lots and lots, not least actually about our own business, which I think is often the case when you're doing a deep dive on something like brand identity. And that positions the team very well now, I think, as partners of the business. Would we do things differently? Absolutely. So many key learnings. I think for me, it was the assets prioritization that could have used some work. I think given that 9-month lead time and the way that the project kept evolving, the lists of assets got longer and longer and longer as people got really engaged with where the brand was going to be presented. And I think we perhaps could have started that slightly earlier. So if I can share my experience, strength and hope with people, maybe start your assets inventory and your desirable assets inventory at the beginning of the project as well. Hol,
I was going to say I've got two to add to that. One is that we went through a process with the font where, to really create complete uniqueness for the brand, we created a customized font. which Ella and I have discussed since, but ultimately was a bit of a faux pas on our end, because it did mean that outside of the website, any assets that we created and then sent to other people, if they did not have the font on their own computer, obviously broke. So it did mean that we then had to revert back to your standard fonts. So that was definitely a key learning. And then also the fact that we didn't bring on a tool like Upslide sooner. So having Upslide app rollout would have been a lot helpful. It was there was that gap where we've worked out that there were these issues that were arising where people were taking the new pitch decks and utilize them for their own countries, and they were coming out slightly differently. And Upside came in and solved that issue. So having that right from the start would have been really helpful for a lot of the people in the business, I think.
Definitely.
Thanks for those answers. And one question from Leah, is one that I actually thought of too, is that you mentioned speaking to aspirational clients in your brand study. So how did you go about getting to them if they weren't already your client? How did you start the conversation with them?
Yeah, this was difficult, I will admit, because not only did we need each of our CEOs to communicate with us who those aspirational clients would be or could be, but then we needed to find a mechanism of getting in touch with them and actually pinning them down for a 45-minute session, which is no mean feat. We used a couple of different techniques, not least a very senior consultant and third-party professional who was able to position the benefits to them very clearly. And I think from our perspective, we said we value your opinion so much. We want to get as much from you as possible. So a little bit of flattery helped, I think. And I think in the absence of persuasion and our senior level consultant, bribery. We did offer Amazon gift vouchers as a thank you for participating. So lots of different techniques, but I would say it's well worth it. It was probably one of the biggest value adds that we had as part of the project.
Yeah, I think it's a great tip that people can take away. In the chat, Elena asks, can you tell us more about the Upside cookbook or the DC cookbook that you mentioned earlier?
Yeah, of course. So this was basically, it's a best practice guide ultimately. And whenever it particularly came in the beginning from the working group, who was seeing a lot of the decks that were being created out of their offices and being sent out, and whether there was, a Teams page that was positioned particularly well that had, for example, the DC goal thread, which we rolled out during this launch, going throughout, they would then flag that with us, and we would add that into this. Ultimately, it's now, I think, a 250-page deck of just best practice. And we obviously categorize those so that they're easily searchable and findable. So if someone says, I've got a really text-heavy slide and I don't know how to do this on the new deck, then they would be able to go to that. And there's a whole section dedicated to this is how people have positioned text-heavy slides. So ultimately, it was working within the business to pull out those best practice uses of the new template and then ensuring that's accessible to everyone else, which is why it now sits in our Upslide library.
Super interesting. And then final question that we have in the chat: what has been the legacy of the project of the marketing team internally?
This was a good moment for the marketing team. I think if I had to put a headline response to it, it was a good moment. Not only had we partnered with the senior stakeholders to help or contribute towards the business's overall growth strategy, which positions us very well as partners for the business overall. But all of those conversations, all of that dialogue, and the openness with which we approached receiving feedback and partnering together on different elements of what that brand identity looked like, ultimately meant we could sit quite confidently at the heart of the organization. And I think also that consolidation piece meant we had a very lucky opportunity, a very good opportunity to look at the business from sort of 10,000, 30,000 feet, and become that sort of central station, I guess, grand central station for any requests and stuff within the international organization. So I'd say it was a really beneficial project for us and for the business to get to know the marketing function, but I'd say most critically for the role of a brand in the development or growth of an international business overall.
Thank you very much. Thank you both for answering the questions. So just to kind of wrap up, so hopefully by now you know that Upside is a branding and productivity tool in Microsoft Office, and What we've talked about today is how we can help you ensure a successful branding project by achieving a smooth rollout, making it easier for your teams to adopt, and also helping you monitor the success like we have helped with DC. So to chat about the project that you might be going through or see how I might be able to help you, please email the address on screen now, and either myself or one of my colleagues will be able to come back to you. Or if you prefer, drop a quick note in the chat now and one of the team can follow up with you directly. Before you go, I'm going to do a final poll, which I think I might need to stop sharing my screen in order to do. So let's just put up the final poll for you to answer. It's basically just some feedback on how you found the webinar today, how useful it was for you in particular. So I'll leave that up on the screen, but whilst that's there, thank you so much for joining, and a huge thank you to our speakers today, Jen and Holly. We really appreciate all the advice that you've been able to give us, and we look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you for having us, and thank you everyone.
Thanks everyone. Bye.